As we said, there's going to be a make or break week on healthcare. And to open that conversation for us, to talk about the moral dimensions of what the struggle means, what we're called to do, we're deeply honored to have the Reverend Dr. William Barber II on the call. Reverend Barber is the founder and senior lecturer of Repairs of the Breach in North Carolina, and he is a founder of the Moral Mondays movement. For all of us behind Resist Trump Tuesdays, we owe our inspiration to Reverend Barber. The point is to have consistent, repeated direct action focused on our targets, and Reverend Barber and the Moral Mondays movement, you've showed us the way in North Carolina. Reverend Barber, I just want to really thank you for joining the call. Reverend Barber?
Thank you so much, my friend. And I would just want to note that Repairs to Breach is a national organization. We've done 22 state moral revivals and training. We just trained over 140 leaders from 25 states this past week in moral resistance, moral articulation, moral analysis, and moral activism. And so I want to mention that because so many places around the country are beginning to understand something about this moral framing that has to be undertaken along with the other things that we do. I first also want to say something we say in the movement: forward together, not one step back. We really must understand the moment we are in is a moment of deconstruction. And it's not an anomaly. It's American. It's as American as apple pie. It has happened before. It's not the worst we have ever seen. Similarly, in many ways, this is similar to the kind of deconstruction that followed progressive reconstruction immediately after the Civil War in the 1800s, when blacks and whites joined together in the South to reshape the South and the country. And then there was a massive backlash. And similarly, the second reconstruction in the civil rights movement of the 1950s to the 60s. And then there was a massive deconstruction movement called the Southern Strategy, always an attempt to roll back progressive agendas. And so these extreme policies, extreme nominees, extreme recommendations for the Supreme Court are really rooted in deconstruction. I was really moved last year when I read a speech by George Wallace, 1968, in New York, that sounded just like the stump speech almost of Donald Trump. And Steve Bannon said it at CPAC. He said that the goal was deconstruction of the administrative state. Trump was elected, and Ryan and McConnell are committed to deconstruct not just the Obama legacy, but progressive legacy. And this kind of movement has deep roots in the deconstructors that we have seen down through history. And their actions are rooted in fear and in racism and in classism. This is not an anomaly. It has happened before. And I want us to say that because it's important that we have the right analysis in order to understand our action. Please read Dr. Nell Painter's analysis of this moment, a professor of history at Princeton, where she lays out that this is a call and response that we've seen time and time again in America. But also within that history, we understand and learn what kind of organizing we have to do to beat it back. And if you can listen to a sermon I tried to preach entitled Revival After Rejection, it may be helpful. And my friends, when you understand this, where we are, we may not all agree on everything, but we better understand the moment we are in and fuse together. Our efforts, we have to fuse them together. Because the one thing we see is that the extremists and the deconstructors, they will dismiss racism, they will dismiss abuse of women, they will dismiss lies, they will even dismiss Russian connections if they think you can embrace their agenda and help their agenda along. So we in progressive communities may have some differences, but we cannot afford to be divided. We are in the battle for the third reconstruction of America. And the extremists are scared. That's why they're doing this. They're trying to do this now before the coming diversity so changes the political landscape that extremists will not have a majority and will hardly be able to get elected, even in the South and in the Rust Belt. They see a future coming that they cannot stop. They can only delay. And so there's some things I want to suggest we have to do in this moment. First, we have to critique these issues like health care and repealing health care with moral language. We cannot allow this to just be a left versus right conversation. In fact, I encourage people to stop using the language right, because it's bad to call people right and then turn around and try to convince people they're wrong. We can't just use the language Republican versus Democrat. We must challenge these legislations as being wrong, immoral, in violation with our deepest constitutional values, in violation with our economic justice values, and in violation of our deepest religious values. In fact, just one scripture that Christian Jews and Muslims lift up and honor says in Isaiah chapter 10, "Woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey." Some legislation is literally immoral. It is literally evil. It is violent public policy. And we must use moral language to critique, just like when Kennedy and Johnson used moral language to call for the Civil Rights Act and the War on Poverty and the Voting Rights Act. And then that moral language allowed other people to come together, even though they may have been from different parties. Also, we must call out these congresspersons who claim to be Christian or people of faith who support this regressive legislation, particularly in health care and suppression of the votes and other legislation. We must call them out, challenge them on moral terms, and we must call out the silence of so-called white evangelicalism that seems to be so loud when it comes to attacking our LGBT brothers and sisters, attacking women who right to their own health, and attacking schools when they don't allow certain kind of religious prayer in school, but they're so silent on the fundamental, the most preeminent issues of faith and religion and the scriptures, which is how we take care of the least of these. And next, we must call on progressives to fill the galleries of the Congress with persons who will be hurt by this plan. We cannot let them merely pass this legislation without the galleries being filled and the halls being filled by people who will be hurt by this plan or may die. And we must use every tool available to put a face on that. Next, we must unpack the lies in simple, short, bare-knuckle truth. We must clearly show the intersectionality. For instance, the same states and politicians that have refused to restore the Voting Rights Act, which is one of the reasons we're in this mess now, because the most untold story is what has been done with voter suppression and voter redistricting that allows us to have a Congress like we have now under Ryan and under McConnell, and even allowed someone like Trump to get elected because there were 868 less voting sites in the black and poor communities this past year than they were in our last election cycle. That's the most undertold story. But there's a direct connection between failing to restore the Voting Rights Act and voter suppression and those who attack immigrants and Latinos and fight living wages, those who fight climate justice, and, for instance, this regressive health care legislation. So we can't just fight in silos and just on our issues. And we have to unpack the lie. When they're saying that it's in a death spiral, we have to have clear, short, strong statements of truth to unpack that lie. When they say we can't afford it, we have to talk about the $200 trillion offshore by greedy businesses that, in fact, disables the ability of us to do the things we need to do in this society. Next, we have to challenge the media. For instance, Jeffrey Lord on CNN, I believe we need an online effort to go after him, for instance, hard as an apologist and challenge CNN for allowing him to continue his lies that are worse than Kellyanne Conway's lies. Today, he just said a few minutes ago, you don't mess up insurance for 355 million people so you can help 24 million. And it wasn't challenged. It wasn't called out by the commentator. He's also said that people were dying because of Obamacare. Well, the truth is people were dying before the Affordable Care Act, and people have died in more than 20 states that refused to expand Medicaid. For instance, in North Carolina refused. That's 500,000 people that were refused Medicaid expansion, 346,000 white people, 120-some thousand black, and 2,000 to 2,800 people died every year since 2013. We have to have an online and otherwise effort that says to the leadership of CNN and our news networks, you cannot allow people to come on and be listed as political analysts, and they tell bold-faced lies, and they are not challenged. If we challenge Kelly Conway, for instance, we have to challenge folk like Jeffrey Lord, and we need a progressive group that's going after that specifically. Next, our efforts must put a face on those impacted. We must put their face, their stories, their hurt, their pain on blast, on stage. The sick who will lose their health care, the sick who need it now, the poor and the working poor, those who are dying. We have to make sure that in all of our efforts, that the main people speaking from the stages, the main people we put up are those impacted. And we must welcome those now who are realizing they voted for a con. There are people that are going to come now and see what they have done. We can't morally be angry at them and say, I told you so. We have to join them in this fight if we're going to win. We need persons that will lead us into these offices who have been impacted. The persons that are impacted must be with us, beside us at our press conferences, and they must bring all their emotion, all their pain. And I want to even suggest to clergy that may be on the line, if a person dies or gets sicker in the states that didn't, for instance, expand Medicaid, we need to make sure that story becomes news. There's a group of clergy in several states now that have decided that if someone died because of this legislation or because their state didn't expand Medicaid, we're going to do like Emmett Till's mother did and have open casket funerals, invite the media in and say, this is what violent public policy does. We're in the battle for the heart and soul of this nation in the third Reconstruction, and we have to look at it that way. We also must expose the kind of health care these congresspersons have as a result of being elected. They have health care that they only receive because they were elected, while they're trying to take health care from others. For instance, Ryan has health care paid for by us. So does Ted Cruz. We must expose that. We must expose the race and class connection. A lot of progressives are saying 24 million people are being thrown off. We have to disaggregate those numbers so people can see themselves. Of that 24 million, how many are black? How many are Indian? How many are Latino? How many are from the South? How many are LGBTQ? How many are disabled? How many are women? We have to disaggregate the numbers and not just allow it to be a blanket. A moral critique disaggregates the numbers because we say all people matter. We don't just group the numbers in together. And there also we must start thinking about raising the equal protection question, the 14th Amendment. Is this legislation in violation of the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law? We need lawyers working on that issue even now. Remember, they took the Affordable Care Act to court. We need to be prepared to take this piece of legislation to court. And lastly, civil disobedience will have to become a part of our strategy. Now, I don't believe in civil disobedience as a one-time event where we just do something to be seen. But when you have tried to negotiate and educate, when you see people passing what Coretta Scott King what's called violent public policy, particularly after Thursday's vote, if they go through with this in the House, we will need to strongly look at civil disobedience, coordinate it with moral leaders and impacted persons and advocates. And as a step in this direction, I want to invite many of you Wednesday at 1 o'clock to come to the Capitol grounds and go with clergy, impacted persons, and advocates as we march on Ryan's office. Not just have a rally outside, but we go through the security. We're going into his office, clergy leaders' investment, impacted people with holy books and special declarations for them not to go forward. They may do it anyway, but we need to try this one last time of going in and doing it right and putting a moral face on this. But I truly believe that after Thursday, if they continue, in light of all this getting ready to happen this week, that we have to consider uniting our groups and having forms of civil disobedience in Washington, D.C., in their offices, and also back home in their offices. We cannot just have one or two actions. We must begin. A moral movement says that at some point you have to be willing to put your body on the line in a consistent way. And then finally, we should right now have a voter registration effort. Every call, every time we have a rally, everything we're doing should include voter registration. And it should be going on now, not in 2018, but right now. We're winning in the court against these gerrymandered districts and against photo ID unconstitutional, but we have to. Right now in the South, for instance, if you register 30% of the unregistered black voters and connected them with progressive whites that are unregistered and Latinos, you could change 4 or 5 southern states immediately in terms of election. If that were to happen, that fundamentally shifts the political landscape. And so we have to begin having, not when the Democrats start their machinery, not when the movement, those of us who are in the moral and progressive movement, we must begin even now. And we cannot engage this moment with just having a rally mentality or an event mentality. We must think in terms of long-term movement building, which is one of the reasons why Repairers of the Breach, along with the Kairos Center, at January 1st of this year, we announced plans to begin the National Moral Revival Poor People, Poor Children campaign. Not remembering what Dr. King did 50 years ago, but doing it and beginning to organize for the long haul, consistent, long-term strategy, keeping pressure on. And listen, we cannot evaluate our strength based on whether we win the immediate vote. We're going to lose some votes. They may go on and get more arrogant. The Bible says Pharaoh got worse before things got better. But when you build a moral movement that has long-term marathon vision, you either win in the moment or you lay the foundations and sow the seeds for the victories that will be come to pass. 100 years ago, everything that we as progressives hold dear was called impossible. People said it would never happen. But those moral dissenters of that day, those moral actors of that day, they never thought in terms of one day, 1 year, one rally. They thought in terms of battling and standing, even when the odds were against them. I just left Selma as I close. In 1965, Johnson was not a Democrat, wasn't for the Voting Rights Act. The Congress, they said, would never do it. But a moral movement, Dr. King and young people and older people, white and black, put their bodies on the line, and they shifted the consciousness. It didn't happen immediately. The March on Washington happened in 63. Voting Rights Act didn't happen until 65. But they did not look at it in terms of one rally is going to fix this, one tweet is going to fix this. We are in a moment that is as American as apple pie. It's called Deconstruction. But we also know what else is American, what else is also in the universe, and that is in every age, moral dissenters have stood up, and they have committed themselves to long-term movement building. And when they've done that, they either win in the moment or they win in the days to come, but ultimately they win. And this attack on health care, as Dr. King said, of all of the evil, to attack health care is of the worst and the most sinful, because it is literally a matter of life and death. So let's fight this week, and no matter what happens Thursday, let's build, let's commit, let's grow, and even if it means consistent, long-term civil disobedience led by people who are impacted by these negative policies, let us become the moral dissenters, the moral defibrillators, and the moral agents of our time.